Hello, everybody. I'm going to wait just a couple of seconds here and then I'll get started. All right, I'm going to go ahead and start. My name is Deana Lashley. I'm a pediatrician here in Jacksonville, and I've been asked to talk to everybody today about child development, something that as a pediatrician, I am always excited to talk about because I think it helps parents understand what's going on with their kids at certain ages. And a lot of times we have to tell parents what you're seeing and what you're hearing is normal. And so I like to talk about what's normal so that us as parents can have a better idea of how to spend days with our kids, especially if they're home a lot during this quarantine time and during this time with COVID. And if you're a stay-at-home parent, it's just important to understand what developmentally your child can be doing, how they can respond, and also if they're misbehaving, what are some ways that will help them to change their behavior, and what are some things you can do to help them change their behavior. So what I'd like to do is take a few minutes today to talk about all the different age groups. I'm going to do them in groups because sometimes a child doesn't change much from 4 to 5 years old. And I'd like to start from birth and go all the way up to 18 years old. And if you have any questions or comments or anything, feel free to leave them in the comment box and we can address them as we go along or at the end. So I just want to start by talking about the very, very, very new babies, the 0 to 11-month-olds. These are the ones that are learning things for the first time. And I think that's something really important to remember. They are seeing things for the first time. They're hearing sounds for the first time. When they feel textures, they're feeling those for the first time. So it's a big time for them to really explore those senses and even figure out what senses are. They, as they get into a few months of age is when they start to see color. So when they're first born, they're colorblind. And as they get into the few first months, they're starting to see color. They'll respond to those really vibrant colors. Red is usually a big one for kids at this age. They're also learning how to self-soothe. They're starting to recognize their caregivers as people who take care of them. And they're also starting to do things developmentally, like they're starting to smile around 4 months old. They're starting to play peekaboo. They're learning to reach and grasp for objects. And as they start to get more advanced in that year, they're starting to do more things. Around 6 months, they're starting to crawl. Around 9 months, they're starting to stand. And around 11 months old, some of them are even starting to walk. And so watching them develop, things happen really fast, and they're always wanting to explore new things as they're capable to do that. Babies will cry, they'll gaze, they'll imitate you to achieve their goals, such as wanting to eat, needing their diaper changed, wanting to sleep. Crying is their first way to communicate with you. They don't have words. Crying, they realize, gets them things that they need. And so it's very important to remember crying is normal. Crying is what they need to be doing because that's how they're telling you that they need things. Infants don't understand misbehaving. They don't know how to misbehave. So it's very easy at this age. You don't discipline them because they don't respond to it. They don't even know what right and wrong are. So infants should never be punished, and they should always be supervised by an adult. So it's a really fun stage just to watch them develop. It's almost like they learn something new every day. If you have kids or recently had little ones, you can remember that. Moving into the next stage, it's a pretty narrow window, 1 to 2 years old, because they develop so fast at this age. This is when they're starting to become more mobile, so they're really starting to explore their surroundings, but they are still looking back at the caregiver. They still don't want to get too far away, so they will crawl away for a minute or walk away, but they'll turn back to make sure you're still there and still watching them. They're starting to enjoy some independence. They're also learning stranger and separation anxiety. So this is when you're starting to drop them off places, or if you take them to daycare, they start to maybe cry a little when you leave them. Going to bed starts to be difficult if it wasn't before, because they don't want you to leave the room. So things like that are starting to happen at this age. This is also the age that they're starting to have temper tantrums. They might be very short, they might be very long, but they start to develop around as early as 12 months old, and really into the 1 to 2 year old range is when they're the biggest temper tantrum time. And then they're testing boundaries of their surroundings. So they might reach out for something, you tell them no, and they'll pull back, but they may reach again because they just want to know, why wasn't I allowed to do that? Or what is going to happen if I do that? So you just have to keep helping them realize that that's not a good idea. Some fun activities with them. They're starting to enjoy simple pretend play. So they might take an animal and hug the animal like they've seen you hug them as babies. They might try to, those little puppet animals, they might try to use as their own puppets. And of course, they can't quite do it right, but they're really trying. They're starting to turn book pages. They love turning book pages. It's really good for their fine motor development. And they might be showing or offering toys to you as the adult. They're looking for that interaction with you. They are starting to scribble and draw. They're following simple commands. So things like, if you're about to go outside, you can say, bring me your shoes. They can understand one command at a time. They can't do more than that. And gross motor, they're learning how to climb, especially as they get closer to 2. So it's really important to know that they're learning how to climb, so that you know you really need to watch them on maybe pieces of furniture that you didn't have to watch them on before. For behavior modification, the best action at this age is to remove them from that object and also redirect them onto a new task. Early toddlers fear abandonment. Remember that stranger separation anxiety. So timeout actually doesn't work at that age. It's almost more of a scare tactic, and they don't really understand why they're there. So it's not helping change that behavior at all at that point. Early toddlers are not verbal enough to understand the word no, and explanations aren't really reliable at that age. If you're trying to explain to them why they're in trouble, they don't really get that. I would say still say no, because that's good for their verbal skills. That's good for them to realize no means stop doing something. So you still say no, but still remove them from that situation, still redirect them to something else to get them to actually change what they're doing. So it's really all about redirecting and just removing them. Remember, their brains are still processing, their memories aren't really all that great yet. So if you remove them and get them onto a new task, they're very happy to switch over to do something else. As we move on, the next stage is to the 2 to 3 year old age range. This is when they are increasing their independence. This can be a challenging stage sometimes, because this is when the tantrums, the aggression, the not listening all the time really peak. The good news is it peaks now and it'll get better, but this is when those things start to really take hold. Bedtime fears and nightmares may start at this stage, so really important to be reassuring and to, when they used to cry and you kind of let them cry it out, now they might be crying because they're actually scared. They might actually need you just to come in the room and tell them that it's okay, because they might truly be having some fears. This is when night lights become important. If they don't already have a night light in their room, they might be having some fears of being in the dark. It's just a lot of reassuring, because their minds, their brains are on overdrive at this point, and they're even using them while they're sleeping. And remember that they're not really capable of lying at this age. So if you ask them something and they say, I don't know, or no, they really mean that. They really don't know. So it's always good to remember that they're not lying. They just really might not know whatever you're asking them. Fun activities is when they get to be really fun, because they really start to pretend play with their imagination. For the first time, you're seeing them actually use their imagination. They can play simple games. They can help get themselves dressed. They're using a spoon really well. By the time they get into the 3-year-old stage, they're starting to ride a tricycle. Remember to have them have a helmet on during that. They're standing on one foot, they're knowing their name, and then by the time they're 3, they can count to 3. And as they progress from 2 to 3, their language skills are really building. And by the time they're 3, they can start to use 3-word sentences. So they're starting to put words together to make little short sentences. When they're misbehaving and you want to try some behavior modification, waiting it out and redirection again are really important. During a tantrum, continue to supervise them, maybe remove them from the object that has gotten them very worked up, but wait it out. They will stop. They will get their mind, their brain is programmed to put them onto something else that they enjoy. So wait it out with them. When they regain control, especially as they get closer to 3, give them a simple explanation and reassurance afterwards as to why that was wrong and why you didn't want them to do that, and that you still love them, but you really want them to change that behavior. This is a great age for setting limits and routine for normal play. So while you had a routine before for when to sleep, when to eat, when to bathe, all of those things, now you really have set times for playtime, set times for setting limits, things like in 2 minutes, we're going to have to go put our toys away. In 1 minute, we're going to have to go put our toys away. Of course, you don't have to wait 2 minutes because they don't know how to tell time, but giving them those simple pieces of things are about to change. I'm letting you know that things are about to change. They can start to understand that around 3 years old. So they're really starting to, their brains are on fire. They're really taking in everything, and they're really starting to understand what's going on around them and understand the communication between the 2 of you or the 3 of you or however many people are in your home. Next is the 3 to 5-year-old group. So this is a developmental stage where they're really exploring and understanding their own identity. So before, they were just kind of going with the flow. They were the baby in the house, and they were doing what they were told. And now, as they've started to get more independent, they're really starting to figure out their own identity and who they are. They're also, remember, we talked about how things were peaking at 2 to 3 years old. At 3 to 5, they're starting to understand how to regulate their anger and aggression if they've gotten upset about something. They're also, because of those verbal skills are really picking up now, they're able to talk about some conflict with their feelings. They're able to tell you that they're mad or sad or something has hurt their feelings. Those skills are really starting to develop really at 3, and they're progressing into 5 years old. And they're also starting to look for approval from their caregivers. So they're starting to do things not just to do them, but they're starting to do them to get approval from you as their caregivers. They do feel remorse for bad behavior. So those emotions are really starting to develop now, and they're really starting to get into, I did something bad and I really feel bad about that. If it hasn't started already, by 3, they really should be toilet training, especially in the daytime. By 5, they should be day and night toilet trained. But remember, there's some kids are still going to have accidents. That's not something to punish about. That's not something to get mad about. That's normal. That's a normal behavior. And sometimes they can have accidents at night for a long time, even up to 10 years old. So it's just something you work through. It's not something that they're doing on purpose. It's just a normal developmental thing. For their behavior modification, this is when those star charts are wonderful. Remember, they're looking for approval from their caregivers. So any sort of reward they get for good behavior, they love that. They understand that. They want to keep doing it because they want that approval from you. So attention, approval, and praise, those are the most powerful motivators for good behavior. Redirection, but also small consequences right after they do something bad. So if they do something bad, don't wait a few hours to then take something away or have a consequence, because they still can't quite grasp what's going on. So they don't really know why things got taken away from them because they've already forgotten what they did 2 hours ago. So small consequences right then. So if they have a toy and they have done something wrong and they're holding that toy, telling them we have to put this toy away for a couple of minutes, things like that, to really inform them that they've done something wrong and let them know that they need to change that behavior so that they don't lose that toy again. Those are the things that they will really respond to. But remember, those star charts are the best for that age group. I'm going to go into the next stage, which is a big stage. It's kind of the moving out of childhood stage moving into preteen stage, so 6 to 12 years old. So it's a big range. But this is a time for rapid learning and rapid development. They're testing boundaries, but especially when they're younger, they're still very eager to please. They still desire to behave well, but they're not really paying as much attention to directions. So sometimes you find yourself repeating things over and over. Unfortunately, that is normal because their brains are all over the place and they're trying to figure out what is right, what is wrong, what's concrete. They're very concrete at this age. Everything is black and white. So what can I get away with, what I can't get away with? And so they've got all this stuff going on. And so sometimes when you say things, that part's not also going into their brain. And so you have to repeat yourself a few times. Their verbal skills are just continuing to develop, especially early on. They're really starting to talk in sentences or even paragraphs. They're wanting to express themselves with words, but when they're the little guys, the 6, 7, 8-year-olds, they still have some trouble finding those words. And so sometimes they will still act out in aggression or anger because they can't get those words out. And so sometimes they're acting out not because they're being bad, but because they can't get out what they're trying to say. And they may need your help getting those emotions out and getting out what they're trying to explain. As they get older, you might see them start to withdraw from the family a little bit, family time, because they're really interested in developing their own identity and seeing who they are. By 7, they're sounding out letters. They're reading on their own. They may need some help with some bigger words. And as they're older, they're continuing to have that concrete thinking at home and at school. Motor skills are continuing to improve, and this is the stage 6 to 12 where you might see some kids have some particular talents. So a music talent or a sports talent or an art talent, those things are going to start to show themselves during this time frame because that's when that side of the brain is really getting going and really seeing things at school or seeing things at home, and they want to mimic that, and now they have the developmental ability to mimic that, and so they're starting to show their talents. And then finally, the last group is the 13 to 18-year-old group, so the teenage group. I think teenagers are fun. I love teenagers, but I do think that you have to want to understand a teenager to really enjoy them. This is the stage where they're just wanting to become a young adult. They just want to get there, and they're striving to be independent, but still having those boundaries because they're still children at home. And then, sorry, let me take a step back because I forgot to talk about the 6 to 12-year-old behavior modification. Approval is still good, but don't use it excessively. We don't want them to become, there is something called the spoiled child syndrome. We don't want that, but we do want them to know that you're proud of them. The star charts still work when they're little, but they kind of lose effectiveness as they get older into that 10, 11, 12-year-old. But withdrawal or taking away privileges as consequences start to work more and more as they get older because those are the things that they're interested in. And it's also important to remember as they're getting older, you're still their parent or their caregiver, so you still need to be making important decisions in your child's life because their reasoning and their judgment is still developing. They don't have that ability, so they still need you to make those decisions for them. Okay, I'm going to jump back into the 13 to 18-year-olds. So they want to be these young adults. They're striving to be independent. Developmentally, they are ready to be independent, but they still need some guidance. Their brains are still developing. They still need some help. They'll begin to test out new ideas, clothing styles, mannerisms. You might start to watch them and go, I saw your friend do that. Now you're doing that. They're starting to just figure out who they are and who they want to be. Sometimes they'll be moody and they do need their privacy, and that's just something that they need. That's something that they're starting to get away from the family dynamic a little bit because they are trying to figure out who they are, and sometimes they just need some alone time like you've never really seen before. They'll begin to value friends' opinions more than maybe yours. And they may start to distance themselves emotionally, but they still want to show you their successes. So they may not want to tell you about their day. They may not want to tell you about their new special friends, but they do want you to know when they got an A or a B or when they've done something great at school or with a talent, because they still want you to be prideful and they're prideful of their successes. This is the time that they may be interested in dating, and they may be spending a lot of time with friends. Developmentally, they're starting to think more logically. They're starting to develop that abstract thinking, so things aren't black and white anymore. So you might hear them start to have big discussions or want to have big discussions with you because that's where their brain is leading them. And they're starting to have some impulsive decision making. So there are some impulsive things like sneaking out when they shouldn't, breaking some of those rules. It's unfortunately normal that their brain is doing that. Even more important that you as a parent or caregiver need to be setting some good boundaries for them so that that doesn't get out of hand and they know how to regulate that. It's important in this stage for parents and caregivers to remain available in setting rules in a non-critical way. Don't belittle an adolescent, avoid lectures that puts them off, that pushes them towards that I'm an independent, almost adult person and I want to be there. So those sorts of behavior modification things won't really work with them. But ensure that the basic rules are that they're following are consistent, and also make sure that there's logical consequences set up and keep it non-confrontational. So a logical consequence, not you're grounded for 17 months, something logical that makes sense because their brains are able to understand that. They may not like it, but they're able to understand it if it fits. Taking away privileges is obviously the most effective way to discipline at this age. They understand it. You did this wrong. Now you can't have this. It's a very reasonable way to do some behavior modification at this age. But also reason together with your teenagers. Remember, they're trying to become young adults. They want to become young adults, and you want them to become young adults eventually. So it can now become a two-way conversation with them where you're really reasoning with them and having these conversations about, you did this wrong. We now need to talk about what the consequence is going to be. And that can be a dialogue between the two of you that you didn't get to have before they were in this teenage stage. So it's very fun. Every stage is very fun, but every stage is very different. And developmentally, every stage is very different. So I think having a good understanding of who they are and what they can be doing at that stage really helps you to understand what you can do with them at that stage, especially, like I said, if you're home with them all day, but also how you can help them to continue to grow over time and be these wonderful children and young adults that you're very proud of. That's all I have for you. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Jean. I see you on there. Hi. Thank you for inviting me. And then if there's any questions or any comments or anything, we can talk about those now. All right. Well, if there's nothing else, I will say a good website to reference all of these things is the healthychildren.org website, or also the CDC actually has a lot of good information, especially for the younger kids. And it's always a good resource to have if you want to look back over these things. Also, your pediatrician is always a good resource. They have a lot of tidbits they can offer, some as parents, some as pediatricians, and some as both. So always know that you've got those resources out there for you. And I thank you all for listening. Have a great Monday and the rest of your week.